Yes.
I'd like to express my impression on your talk and then ask you a question. I felt that in your presentation, you seems to base on a nation or a group of people need a ruler, and those rulers who control the government and control the society, and then they go to a certain extent, you will reach the sweet spot, and that curve, sweet spot, seems to be very traditional curve when the empire go up to the peak and then will certainly go down. Based on that concept, in the Soviet and communist country, the curve will go up to the plateau, and that plateau may prolong for a long time, and then eventually, in my believing, those communist countries will drop down all of a sudden. So that curve, I have a question on that curve. And then you mentioned, based on the certain accommodation of democracy in the dictatorship country, you based on that curve, attend the sweet spot, and then give people some sweet, some candy, and then to test it, and then to maintain their power. And then you mentioned that as a democracy, it's not the democracy. It's just a continuation of holding to the power dictatorship. The real concept of democracy seems to me an entire citizen like to be free, and like to maintain their right and right to enjoy their right, and then elect a group of people to govern the country, and those group of rulers or ruler or government employees are supposed to be the servant for the people. That's the main difference in the concept of democracy and the dictatorship. And I felt that your talk seems to be based on the past record, and then some superficial society development, and then you try to interpret how it's developing. And so I felt that there is a major difference in the two political systems, the dictatorship and democracy. And so I felt that you have a concept of those rulers are rulers in a nation or in a group of society. They are the at most intelligent people, and they are the only one can control the society. I felt like in the United States, in the big society, there are a lot of talents in different fields, in different disciplines. And all of them can contribute to the society, not necessarily the bureaucrat in the central government.
Another way of broadening and generalizing the question is, what's the scope for civil society?
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I apologize if the impression I give is that that this is simply a story of elites, and it's simply a story of ascribing all this power to elites. So, as I say, the book really is intended to be a story of democracy and development, right? And so, a lot of the treatment of Taiwan, for instance, I mean, we have a thickening of civil society, we have growth of the middle class, we see the kind of economic diversification that we would expect to see of a modernizing economy. We see capable activist leaders from within society. All of these things are absolutely critical. And it's a story that will be told, and I think in many ways has been told. What I'm concerned with in this explanation, and it's not to the exclusion of all the other things that you've just described, what I'm really concerned is, in the end, decisions have to be made amongst those who wield enormous amounts of coercive power. Right? And whether they're right or wrong or smart or good or whatever is not the question that I'm asking. It's you know, Don and I were saying, you know, it's last night, it's sort of, it's not like you go to bed one night in an autocracy and the next morning you wake up in a democracy, right? Overnight, someone had to make a decision. Right? Overnight, someone had to say, we're going to pull the military back. Overnight, someone said, we're not going to use the coercive apparatus of the state any longer to ensure that people conform to, and to do all of the dastardly things that you've just described. That has to be a decision. So this, what I presented to you today, is just one part of the story. But it's a really important part, because until the state relinquishes the capricious use of that extraordinarily wrongly used coercive power, then democracy is impossible. So when people ask, well, what do you mean by democracy, or what is democracy? I mean, one way of saying is, being able to dissent without the threat or the uncertainty around the threat of being thrown in jail. I mean, that's important, right? Because that then brings to the forefront all of the things that you said: civil society, smart people, the ability to check governments, and so on. But at the core of that is the removal of the capricious use of the coercive apparatus of the state. And I just, that is a decision. Somebody has to decide. Yes.
Yeah, I thought I should have the last question. A long question, being short, and somehow my question is somewhat related to some previous point. But I think the main logic of this talk is that the decision to choose which kind of regime type is a result of the utility function of the ruling party, of the elite, and that's the part of the story we're really concerned about. And we're treating some of the signals, some factors we talk about, these social signals about protest, economic signals or geopolitical signals, these electoral signals are exogenous to the utility function of the elite. Those are given, and they decide whether these signals could change our utility function. But somehow, I think in the whole story, there is a merit of concerning other functions, other utility functions. Actually, these external exogenous signals are the results of these utility functions. The utility functions of the common people, or the utility function of international politics. Like, for example, you talk about the social signal of protest. That could be considered as a collective action problem of the people. And they have this utility function to judge whether they should throw out a protest or not. And for the geopolitical or economical signals, there are some political economic arguments saying that based on Barbara Gigi's regime type of categorization of authoritarian regime type, these are somehow related to the results of international politics regarding probably trade policy or environmental policy, right? So that could also be considered as a utility function of the results of international politics. So in other words, the whole story could be seen as a multiple equilibrium of all these utility functions, not as only a single result of the utility function of the elite. I think viewing it that way would possibly make a different, would generate kind of a different kind of view. And I'm just wondering why we didn't start the story in this way, or just treating these things as exogenous factors.
It's a great question. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that all of these the signals themselves are a reflection of decisions made by other actors based on exogenous utility functions that are exogenous to the elites themselves. Yeah, I mean I don't disagree with you, but I also don't problematize it. I mean I am, as you say, just simply assuming that they matter in the calculations of these elites. And yes, in the presentation of this paper, I am presenting the decision calculus, or at least making an argument about the decision calculus of particular elites. If you recall at the very beginning of the paper, I said, look, democracy is a choice, and I gave two ways of thinking about it. One was the choice, the decision to choose the possibility of defeat, which I suggest to you is a hard decision, and the other one was the decision to protest in the streets, right, which is itself a difficult decision. And you're absolutely right. I don't problematize that. But from the point of view of the elites and the decision calculation that I'm looking at here in this specific paper, I'm just treating them as exogenous, as given, but something that they nonetheless have to consider. But for the purposes of the longer study, you're not unwrong. You're absolutely right.
Great, thank you so much. I was talking about it because whenever I look at Taiwan's own story, I think these other utility functions are always important in Taiwan's own story.
Yeah.
Whether the people or the international factors.
Yep, absolutely.
So we're really, I'm afraid, at the end of a very full week and on the cusp of a very long weekend. But before we thank you, I wanted to note that I think this is going to be the last seminar where we're going to have the great benefit and pleasure of the presence and assistance of our partner at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in San Francisco, who's been working so closely with us the last, I think it's been 3 years now. Daniel Lin K. Young. So Daniel, we just wanted to thank you. You've been an amazing partner, and of course we love working with TICO in San Francisco, and we're extremely grateful to you for your support and partnership. Wish you well. And so join us one final time in thanking Professor Wong, Joseph Wong, for this really great presentation and what's going to be, I think, a very seminal book.
Thanks, Larry. I appreciate it. Thank you.